Good evening, everybody. It's an absolute delight to see all of you here. I know it's December, there's lots happening, and you all have other commitments. I know that most of you have to go somewhere else as well, but you've honored our invitation. We're really, really grateful. I am Vaishali Joshi, the Ehsaas woman for the Goa chapter of Prabha Khaitan Foundation. And today we have a special evening with Ms. Puneet Sikka for the Right Circle. The Right Circle is a platform which is organized by the Prabha Khaitan Foundation under many of its literature initiatives. It is birthed to bring together authors and readers of English literature and language in a close, engaging and informal setting. The sessions are structured around the life and works of the author, followed by an interaction with the audience. The Right Circle began its journey from Jaipur and has now conducted sessions in many places across India and even overseas, Oxford, Birmingham, New York and Oslo. Today's event is in collaboration with Siddharth Goa, media partner Lokmat, and of course the tireless support of all the Ehsaas women. Today we have a very special personality, Ms. Puneet Sikka. But before I go into introducing Puneet Sikka and we dive into today's much awaited conversation, let me take a couple of minutes to introduce you to the Prabha Khaitan Foundation. There are some of you here who've been regularly attending our program, so it might be a little repetitive for you, but I have to talk about the foundation. The Prabha Khaitan Foundation is a non-profitable trust committed to humanitarian and socio-cultural causes. Late Dr. Prabha Khaitan established it as a charitable trust in the early 1980s. Based in Kolkata, it is committed to supporting women's empowerment, gender equality, literature, culture, children's welfare, social causes, arts and the performing arts. Late Dr. Prabha Khaitan was an eminent Indian literator, philanthropist, social worker, entrepreneur and feminist who established the foundation and is embodied in her famous words, Karm hi Jeevan hai, work is life. Charting a glorious 40-year journey, the foundation has only gone from strength to strength by launching many initiatives to further the cause that Dr. Khaitan had envisaged. The Prabha Khaitan Foundation organizes authors' meets, book launches, literary festivals, panel discussions, boutique festivals, and events of performing arts. We've already had about 5 or 6, and I'm sure some of you have attended them. So we have quite a wide variety of events, and it's always only because of the support of the people of Goa that we have been able to do this. It's one of the very young chapters. The Goa chapter is a very young chapter. The foundation curates the best of events to widen the spectrum of language and literature, be it English, Hindi or regional. Authors and artists connect with their niche audience through diversified events like Kalam, Kitab, Ek Mulaqat, Tete-a-Tete, Aakhar, Lafz, Sur or Saaz, Muskan, Rahat, Karuna and so on. And these are its ingenious pillars. To create awareness in the community, we uphold one pressing social issue every month. We are elated to share that 3-time Grammy Award winner Ricky Cage, the man behind the signature collar tune of the Prabha Khaitan Foundation, has curated 12 amazing musical pieces to score across video invites of events and social media platforms. So the video invite that you received has got Ricky Cage's music in it, and we are very, very grateful to him. Now let me introduce the lady of the moment, Puneet Sikka. She is an actress and a media professional who has worked in theatre, television and digital commercials, short films and a feature film. She has studied at the Lady Shri Ram College and the Symbiosis Institute of Media and Communication. Her debut novel, Take Number 2020, is a hybrid of pop culture and realism that combines her lived experience within the entertainment industry and her passion for writing. Like I told you, she is an alumni of the prestigious Lady Shri Ram College from Delhi. And we also have another alumni here, Mrs. Anju Timlo. She's also from LSR. So Puneet Sikka is from the Department of Philosophy and has always been an active contributor to art. She's the founder of Artery, a platform for artists, musicians, and music bands to showcase their talent, enabling them to connect with industry professionals. College was a lot of fun. It was liberating in a lot of ways. There was a lot of room to expand, to grow, try out things, and discover strengths in oneself, says Puneet Sikka. While at LSR, she was also an active member of the Dramatic Society as well as the Indian Music Society. She used to work with Hive, the Fine Arts Society. She has also worked with Pierrot Troupe, a Hindustani theatre group based in New Delhi. Puneet Sikka is also an active badminton player. I think she was probably now, I think she doesn't find time during college days. So we have a very, very eminent person here, and we can't wait to unpack and find out what she has to tell us and what she has to say about her book and about her life. And it's always very interesting to talk to young people, who have a lot of dreams and they are very inspiring. So today in conversation with Puneet Sikka, we have our very own Ehsaas woman of Goa, Shruti Zuarkar. A self-made entrepreneur and a mother of two, she is a passionate advocate for self-improvement and cultural preservation. Born in the vibrant city of Varanasi and now based in Goa, she brings Banarasi weaves to the global stage as founder and CEO of Kirasta Couture OPC Private Limited. Since 2016, she has championed sustainability through her apparel brand, Roo Serve. Representing the Prabha Khaitan Foundation in Goa, she promotes Indian art and culture as part of the Ehsaas Women of Goa initiative. I'm going to hand it over now to Shruti, requesting Puneet to please take the stage. Thank you so much. And I also request all of you to please keep your mobiles in the silent mode. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Vaishali. That was a very, very thoughtful introduction for all of us, for the foundation and for both of us as well. And I must say I'm deeply honored to be interviewing you today, because in the last 3 or 4 days of stalking her, literally, I have been able to read about her a lot. And she is from a college which I aspired to join as well, which I could not. But yeah, so I'm so thrilled to be interviewing you today. And as I mentioned earlier to her, that I want this interview to be more of not just rubbing the surface. I want to know her, and I want the audience to know her as a person who she is within. So let's start with the interview. Yeah. So Puneet, like I said, I want to know how your childhood was and who you have so many roles that you're playing today, and you're doing so much in terms of your new company, and then your book, and so many things that we read on the Google or Instagram or Wikipedia. But what was your childhood like? That is something that I could not find any details about. Yeah.
First of all, thank you all for having me here. I'm so happy to see such a full audience, and also such eager people to know something about my book and about my life. I'm very, very happy to be here. Thank you for having me here, and for Shruti for stalking me and finding out all these questions that you did. She sent me these questions, and I said, wow, nobody has ever stalked me like that. And pulled out all this information from my life. But it's not just that, it's the attention to the things that you gave was also something which is remarkable, and I wanted to compliment you on that. But coming back to your question about my childhood, my father was in the Indian Navy, and so growing up I was in Bombay and Vizag a little bit, and I think that must have influenced a little bit on how I looked at life. And maybe I'm digressing, but some Fauji kids over here will understand that, because of the constant shifting of the physical base, one does not get time to, one does not have that time to establish relationships or friendships beyond a certain point. and somehow at some point it becomes the mainstay of your life, right? And I realized that much later. In retrospect, I can think about it like that. That also gave me a lot of that was just part of the way I was wired, I suppose, growing up. That there was always, I had my hands in multiple pies. So because of that, I suppose, because you don't have one friend for very long, or one, you just when you think that you've formed a certain, you become a little comfortable in an environment, you're just uprooted from that. So that became a part of, and till date, I suppose, subconsciously, I find myself hopping from one place to the other time and time again. It just happens, whether it's for work, whether it's just giving myself an excuse to go somewhere. I think that's where donning many hats comes from also, because there's always a different set of people that I like to work with. And so childhood was essentially like that, with the background. And then I was very interested in the arts. I was always very inclined towards the arts from a very young age. So, and luckily for me, my mother, she had a lot of stage fright, and she sort of wanted that her kids do not have that stage fear. So she put me in music, she put me in dance, and in our neighborhood, so there was one lady called Bhavani Auntie, and I think we'll come to that. She used to teach Bharatanatyam. So I started training in Bharatanatyam from her. All the colony girls, those little girls, we would just learn from her. And then there was another auntie who used to teach music, classical vocal music. So I started training in Hindustani classical vocal, and that was more serious because I took an exam and everything like that. So growing up, I was part of all of this, and in school, every kid is exposed to painting and art and craft. So I used to participate a lot in those activities. So childhood was vibrant, it was full of color, and in my family I grew up with boys. So I was the only girl. My father tells me I was the first girl child in 40 years in the family. So, and I think I was a tomboy because my cousins, my brother, my blood kid brother, so I just grew up with the boys. So we used to play cricket in the summers, summer vacations. So I was just this this madcap kid, सुबह 6 बजे पहुंच जाती थी. Like in summer school, during school मैं नहीं उठ पाती थी सुबह. I used to hate it. But summer vacations, I used to be up at 6 o'clock, going and ringing the doorbells of all my friends and saying, Auntie Akriti hai, usko bhej do. Auntie Urvashi hai, usko bhej do. And I used to have my cricket bat, and we used to play from 6 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock. Wow. In summer vacations outside, we used to be playing cricket, and how kids are. So, I mean, being a 90s kid, playing outdoors was our thing, And so I was very active, and very sporty that way. So childhood was fun. Childhood was just a thrill overall, and I think all of that contributed to what I gravitated towards even in later life. During college, I think I started taking an interest in Dramsoc, which we call Dramsoc in LSR. It's the Dramatic Society where we call it Dramsoc. I actually was extremely scared of the stage, even though I had done a lot of stage via dance and music. But theatre was a different ball game altogether. Because you had to audition in front of all these 20, 30 people in the common room. And that used to give me a lot of fright, like fear. So I thought the only way to address that is to plunge into it. I did tiptoe my way into the Dramsoc. I did not start off with performing on stage, but I started assisting backstage. So, I would start building the confidence gradually from the wings, watch everybody perform, and then, sort of gradually build my confidence. But I think that's what LSR did for me, college did for me, and I think college, whichever college, I think it does for anybody, is that if you are proactive in participating, then I think there is so much to take from that. And I was always, like I said, stemming from that aspect of, just jumping from one thing, moving, not jumping, but moving from one thing to the other, and sort of having the bandwidth to multitask and to take on a lot more than sometimes one can chew. So one understands with maturity, with time, that okay, this is what I can handle, this is what I can't. But so yes.
Great. that's one tip that I've gotten. That my son also wakes up every holiday at 6 a.m. So yeah, but I didn't know that we can send them to the neighbors to drop. So this is what I'm going to do.
There's DDA flats, no? So ground floor, first floor, second floor. We were on the top floor, so I used to just, as I'm coming down, I used to keep ringing doorbells. Page do, page do.
Good tip that I've got. So, Bhavani auntie, like you mentioned, this was also part of my question, and she fondly spoke about her, that how she learned Bharatanatyam, and she's also a Bharatanatyam dancer, by the way. So, and when you were talking about her, you mentioned two very important wisdom nuggets. One was, if you are not dead, you are not old. And the second was that make your own story. Like till the time you don't tell your story, it's your story. But once you've heard my story, it's your story.
Yeah.
So what are these two nuggets? How these two nuggets have played a role in your narrative, in your life?
I just feel that this life is too short to explore a lot, And they say that you can. I'm coming to that, but there is this quote I read somewhere which said that. You can be anything you want, but you cannot be everything. And sometimes we are trying to be everything in our life. And I've tried to be everything. That I look at somebody and I think that, wow, I'd love to do, what if I was an astronaut? I still live in that universe in my head that, what if I had taken to this field? What if I had taken to that field, When I was born, some astrologer told my parents that I'll become a doctor. And the closest I got to being in the medical field or taking an interest in the medical field is binge watching Grey's Anatomy series. And not get grossed out by it, and in fact watch it when I'm eating food, But I think that I've just had that interest in wanting to explore so many things. And I'm not a trained Bharatanatyam dancer, which is also something which is my grouse, that, my teacher, Bhavani auntie, who was my neighbor, I used to go and chat up with her. I was a very chatty kid. So I would go there and, like kids are, look, ma'am, my new dress, look this, and I went there today and I went here today. I was very chatty. And she left after 3 years. Her husband got transferred somewhere out of India, and then, so I think I was too small to have a frame of reference for what heartbreak means. But that was a heartbreaking moment for me. So I did not dance for many years after that. And it was actually much, much later in 2021 when a friend of mine, he was doing a festival in Goa, by the way. And there was an opportunity where there was this independent musician and there was a whole sort of... So I decided I'm going to do a semi-classical dance on that. And semi-classical is basically, it's not classical, so classical you need to be trained for, but So when I decided that I'm going to go and dance, I wanted to hunt down Bhavani auntie because I just felt that tradition calls for, taking her blessings. And that was a hunt. I went on a hunt for Bhavani auntie.
She also stalked her.
I did. I went to her house, but it was closed, it was locked, and then I asked neighbors. I wrote to her on Facebook, but she did not respond. She was probably not active on social media. I went on for a month trying to trace her before so I could perform, with her blessings. And the story about that is like it was sort of breaking the jinx, because before that, in my 20s, I did try dancing, training in dance, but different forms of dance. Jazz, a little bit of pole dance, a few things that I wanted to try out, and I tried. And a very, very strange, I think you'd probably judge me if I told you, but I'm going to still tell you anyway. Every time I tried to take on one form of dancing or the other, my trainer would somehow find themselves having broken their back or having had an accident. Shutting down completely. The venue would shut down. And it happened 3 times, and I thought, wow, I'm pretty bad luck for my dance teachers. I should not probably try. It was only Bharatanatyam, which I think that now I've started training again. And so I'm pretty new and raw, and all the other girls are like in college or school or something. And here I am trying to understand how to do the Arangetram, because it means you need to build muscle in your thighs. You're sitting in a half sitting position. You need to. So I'm sweating bullets in like half a minute. So the point is that if you're not dead, you're not too old to try anything. And that is what was something which I don't know where it came from, but like I said, that I wanted to be everything, but I've understood with life, with maturity, that I cannot be everything. But whatever I feel in my heart that I want to do, I should not stop myself. I should not let age or environment or societal beliefs or whatever, other people's limitations tell me what I should do and what I shouldn't and at what age. Ideally, somebody would tell you that if you want to be a trained Bharatanatyam dancer, you should have started when you were a child. Fine, so what? I can start now. So,
May the force be with your Bharatanatyam trainer right now.
no, God bless. She's absolutely fine. I was actually nervous. I went and told her, and she's a family friend, in fact. And I told her, she said, don't worry. And that's the thing about Bharatanatyam, it's so beautiful. I love the whole tradition. So, there is the first day of my training, she made me do the puja, and she told me get a coconut, get fruits, get flowers, and we will do a full puja, and we do. So, all of that, it's just, I love that. I love the whole idea of tradition around dance. So, that cannot be jinxed.
Is what they say in the north. Yeah. So before we plunge into the book, I also did talk about your journals. So she also writes journals, and in one of the posts she was talking about burning the journals. So what inspired that symbolic act? Does it feel liberating when you burn them?
Well, just to give you context to what she's saying, there is a video that I had posted where it was Lodi, and we were celebrating Lodi, and there was a bonfire, and I had about 10 journals that were full, and I was just burning them. I was putting them in the bonfire. So first of all, there is that thing about those journals are not for posterity. Those journals are just everyday, sort of writing anything and everything that I can. It's like, to put it crudely, it's like taking a mental dump on paper. Basically, whatever is stuck here, if it stays here, and it's so insidious how our mental chatter can interrupt and impede what we want to do. So when I came to that understanding at some point in my life, I decided that journaling is going to help me, and that's actually what helped me write the book also. When I was able to get rid of that clutter in my head, and it's an everyday exercise. It's like how we brush our teeth and take a bath. It's not that we do that one time and we think we're done, we are clean for the rest of our lives. We have to. It's a ritual. So I think journaling is also for me like that sort of a ritual, which is an everyday cleansing of my mind, and so that if I can clear all of that, then I have space for more, and I have space for better, and then I can choose what I want to think about or store in my. It sounds all nice and everything, but sometimes even with journaling you get a writer's block. Sometimes you open your journal and even though you can write anything, and most times I would not even write anything profound. It would just be like when I was in Bombay, I used to be making grocery lists on my journals. That आज भाजी खरीदना है, आज the काम वाली को आज month का वो देना है, payment देना है. So putting chores down on it, and sometimes just putting basic stuff on it, because that is also sometimes part of our mental clutter, and if we don't get that out. So when I would do that and I would go give an audition, I would fare better. I would be able to perform better, learn my dialogues. At least I need some mind space for remembering my dialogues also. So yes, journaling was something, and there is another. I don't know if it's. I'm sure you might understand this, but I don't know. There is this thing I was talking to KK, Kasturi Kanthan. So we, during the lockdown, she was the vice principal of LSR. So she, I, and another person who was her student, we used to do this Sunday reading. Every Sunday we used to read a book called Women Who Run with the Wolves. And it's basically, that book has had very, very deep impact on me. And there's so many women here, so I would in fact recommend you that. I would recommend that book too. Women Who Run with the Wolves. It's written by a psychoanalyst, Carl Jung, called Clarissa Pinkola Esti. And it's basically about understanding the feminine landscape, the mind space. And the three of us would get together every Sunday and we would read that. And somehow, from that book or otherwise, from everything, I just felt that these journals that I'm writing, I've written it, I've done my job, I've put pen to paper. It's over, I'm not going to revisit this, and after a point I don't want to revisit. There's certain memories you don't want, there's certain things you don't want, there's a lot of random stuff that I don't need to refer to. And somehow, there was a phase when I was feeling energetically very pulled down. So I just felt that maybe as an act, as a ritual, I don't know, a fire ritual or something. So if I put those journals in, let me see what happens. I sometimes don't have very, very logical reasons, but in my head it made sense. And I just wanted to see, does that, they say sometimes you write something on a piece of paper and you burn it. So that was essentially that. It was just putting those journals as is. And I did not want to be caught dead, and people rummaging through my journals. I'm like, that cannot happen. so I might as well burn them before I die, and that can happen anytime. So
I have plenty of them. I'm burning them soon. Yes. But that was very insightful. Moving ahead, you are someone who also talks about showing up. Just being there. So how has this mindset or how has this practice, framed up in your life, and how it has helped you, or any incident that you can quote or you can tell us about that has changed a lot in your life by just showing up?
I think I would say about the book to begin with. Take number 2020 was by no means a cakewalk. And I thought it was going to be a cakewalk, to be honest. I did not, the good thing is, had I known that this is going to be a tough ask, I probably would not have. I mean, how many of us want to walk into a painful time? We always, it's a very human mind set to choose pleasure over pain. There is always that thing. Other than that, point is that when I started writing the book, I just felt that it was first of all not meant to be a book, it was an accidental book, and we'll come to that. I wrote the first draft in about 3 months. So at that time I thought this is a cakewalk because I had spent all of 2020 taking inspiration from the news stories that were coming out in that year. And fact was really stranger than fiction that year. So that was really contributing to my story, to the story arc. And so since I'd done a lot of scribbling on paper and I had put the characters and I'd given their story graphs and everything I'd put down, so fairing it out, so to speak, on my laptop wasn't much of a task. So I did it in 3 months and I thought to myself, wow, people just make a big fuss about writing a book. It is so easy. I've written my first draft. When you don't have any reference to context, you just become cocky. That's what I became. But then I ran it past my mentor and she said, listen, you have a story, but you have no storytelling. And you have to seriously work on that. And that is when I started really chipping at the skill and understanding. I've been a writer most part, but I've done short form writing, like advertising writing. You write for an ad, a 30-second commercial, you write a 1-pager at the most. But I never written long form. So this was absolutely new. And so understanding how to drip feed information, how not to tell everything about the character in the first page, Let that be a revelation even for the reader. Let them explore it, let them understand, let them live the life as the character is living the life, along with the character. And so, at one point, because I had gotten so deeply involved in writing this book, and there were 4 characters, not even 1 character. I don't know why I do these things with myself. I put myself in the deep end and then I'm just like, I have no choice, I have to face it. So I had given myself this task of writing 4 characters, and I had to get into the shoes of each of them. And out of which 3 characters, I was not very familiar with their environment, with their background. So to think and to write from their perspective was a task. And I suppose in the first book there was only madness, there was no method. And that madness sort of made me at one point give up. Because I think you can call it anything. You can call it a writer's block, you can call it exhaustion, you can call it burnout. But I thought that this is it, I can't do anymore. The only thing where showing up helped me was that I would sit for those 2 months, and I did not know how long it's going to be. But every day I would sit with my laptop. I would open it as a ritual, like it's going to work. Open it, stare at it, not get even one word out. By the end of the day, shut it. And I did that for about 2 months. That is the only thing I did, that I did not show up for that. And I was journaling alongside, I was doing other things. But I think that for me was, in hindsight, it made me understand how showing up helps and how it sort of changes something in how we, it changes how we think and how we approach what we do. So we will never, we're complex human beings, our brains are really complex, we can never understand it, it's going to be a mystery for the rest of our lives, no matter how much psychoanalysis we get into. But we are always going to be the most complex case studies for ourselves. And no matter what I did, I was just not able to get even a single word out in those 2 months, and I thought that now what, So there was fear, there was trepidation, there was anxiety, there was everything. But the only thing, apart from all of that I was doing constantly every day, was opening my laptop, trying, thinking, trying to write something, then deleting it. Just at one point I was writing song lyrics. Because I had nothing, I did not know. I thought maybe just the act of moving my fingers on the keyboard could get something out. Just let me write something. So, or some mumbo jumbo. But I think that really helped. And I read about a lot of writers and their processes. So there was some, in that sense, I had read about a few writers who have done things like that, I forget the name of this writer who used to get up every morning, get dressed, get out of his house, take a walk around the block, come back, sit on his desk, just to trick his mind into believing that he's stepped out of the house to go to work, and he's come back and now this is his office time, so this is his desk. I did not do anything like that, but I did try to give myself some sort of a ritual every day, and I think that is showing up. That was showing up for my work, and I think that I use as an example. I mean, I try to think about whenever I'm slacking off now, I think of that time when I did manage to get a book out in spite of wanting to give up.
It is, and that's how it applies to everyone, I think. We all are struggling with our small little things that we want to do, and then we get stuck up. So like, it's something as simple as exercising. We all know it's so important, but we don't show up on our mat or on our gym or, on our treadmills, whatever be it. And if you just show up, it happens. So that's a very... Yes. And 2 months is a long time. Hats off to you for doing it so diligently. So coming to the book, so the book, the title itself, Take 2020, it has a very cinematic approach, and also it talks about the year which was so chronic in so many ways. People have moved on but will not be able to forget as well. So how did that title, something that came up in your mind?
It was pretty sudden. When you get a chance to read the book, there is one of the shows in the book that these characters are working on, a TV show. It's called B Strugglers. So B Strugglers, the B, letter B could stand for Bollywood, or it could just be B, just B Strugglers, because this is a story about aspiring actors, struggling actors. So that was my working title, and that was a title which was suggested to me by somebody I knew. That time I was also not writing this as a book, I was writing this as a web series, to be honest. So he was telling me about this, and while I was writing, so this B Strugglers was the working title. It was only towards the end of writing the book, and I was thinking that, no, I don't like this title. I want something which is more specific and less ambiguous. And this was just one brainwave moment. But the idea is it combines both elements. It combines the element of the films, which is take number. You see a clapperboard and you say scene number, shot number, take number. So it is take number from that. to reference to that part of the world, that industry. And 2020 for the year that 2020 was and how that plays a part in the story. So take number 2020, I thought it was pretty catchy and it was easy on the tongue. So that is something, and I ran it past a few people and they all reacted to it very positively. So I thought maybe then let's just go with it, and that's how it happened. I also then gave it a tagline, the mother of all retakes.
Yes.
So just to be sure that that's what I mean by take, it's a take and a retake. So that I was just,
That's
there was the advertising person that in me who came out that tagline hona chahiye, tagline hona chahiye.
great. And the book also talks about themes which are very sensitive. And it also talks about systemic exploitation, it talks about identity. Like you said, 4 different characters, people go mad in one character. The writer's block within you must have, now we can understand why it would have taken so long for you to put pen to paper. But how did you approach talking about such sensitive issues? Because in today's world, what we live in, it's very difficult to call a spade a spade. So when you were dealing with such sensitive topics, how did you approach them and what was your mindset?
No, I think there's something called as the beginner's foolhardiness, which is that you don't think so much about what is going to happen and who's going to. Of course, I did have a lot of apprehensions about a lot of things. I did second guess a lot of things, but I did not think so much on this aspect about there is a story to tell, and we're human beings. This story is a slice of life. It is not science fiction. It is not parallel universe. It is nothing like that. It is about the time and space we are living in, and as human beings, we have experienced all of that, directly, indirectly, viscerally. We have opinions on that. We have very hot takes on a lot of things and how things were panning out during the pandemic, and so on and so forth. And so I did not see anything which should be discussed, which should be kept behind closed doors in terms of a discussion. And in fact, it's easier to talk about difficult subjects when you can talk about them via characters, via fictional characters. Sometimes it becomes easy. You put that out for the world to read, but you can still talk about it without sort of taking the bullet for it. So this is the character said it, not me.
So this brings me to the next question. So I must tell you all that she is someone. She talked about the book that the Women Who Run with the Wolves is also one of my favorite books, and she herself said that she's not into fiction books, and her first book happens to be a fiction book. So how did you even come up with something like that? Like was it intentional or was it thank you, or was it like not to take the bullet?
So I'm basically a very research-oriented person. When I get into something, then it's just going down the rabbit hole. That's just how if I'm interested in something, then
We both are stalkers then.
Yes, yes, totally. Which is why I pointed that out and I said I'm so impressed. So yes, I stalk subjects of interest, and so anyway, non-fiction I read a lot, and usually something that when I'm drawn to something, then I could, after 2 years you can ask me and I would have probably achieved some sort of PhD level understanding of that subject. But I also think because of theatre, because of the arts, I have been exposed to a lot of stories and storytelling, and I'm so grateful for that. Because auditions, rehearsals in theatre, scripts, you're reading so many of that. Even during, so all of this actually does at some point contribute to, thinking that, hey, there are people who have stories, and then I would keep thinking, I don't have a story. It just took me to sit down and sort of peel the layers of that onion and think that, wait a second, why am I looking outside of myself? I have a story. I have more than one story, but right now I have this one story that I have lived. and I can talk about it very confidently, which is about the film industry, because I've been one of those actors who's gone and auditioned every day and understood how the system works to an extent. So I can talk about it. And as far as non-fiction is concerned, it is a different ballgame. I mean, that will, in spite of my interest in research and being very research-oriented, it will still take time to put something together. But with fiction, it just happened that I wanted to write a role for myself. So when I was auditioning and I was reading, and because I've been a writer, so I think sometimes that's a bane also when you're auditioning for really half-brained, half-baked scripts, you know. And I was reading, this is 2018, 2019, so I was reading these scripts, these small parts that are written for female characters, and I felt very underwhelmed. That why in today's day and age also we're writing these, you know, we're not writing fleshed out characters for women, and why is that? Even in that much of a rehearsal or a piece of audition script, you can get a sense, especially if you've been a writer. And this was a conversation that was coming up with a lot of my friends, and also there are so many ways to approach one thing. That if, what is my goal? I would like to do a film, I would like for it to do well, or I would like for it to, you know, get that visibility, or whatever one's goal is. And if I go about this way, it will take me maybe whatever number of years, but then I also wanted to find that sort of hack of how can I empower myself and not be at the behest of only the casting studios and the production studios. You know, that is also a journey to take, and that's fine. But I thought that I can utilize another skill that I already have and be my own boss. Like, you know, what I mean by that is just tell my own story, and I can write it. So why am I depending on somebody else to do justice to a character that I would want done justice to? So I started writing Meera's character. Meera was the first character I started forming in my head, and I started writing, and I still wrote it. I was writing it as the script for a web series. So I wrote it episodically, in fact. When I started fleshing out on each episode, I realized there is so much to say. There is so much more to say. And gradually the other characters also came into play. You know, because once your imagination is working for you, then it's throwing all sorts of ideas at you, you know. And so that's how it became a book. So it was not intended to be a book. Sorry, what was your question? I think I got lost in this answer.
No, but we are enjoying that as well. So from a non-fiction to fiction. Yeah.
So yes, so that's how actually fiction happened. It was not intended to be written as that, but it happened that I wanted to tell a story for myself and write a story for myself, and I did. And non-fiction would not make me act on screen, so I thought fiction it is.
But you said that it was supposed to be a web series, okay. And now that now that it's written, what is your plan ahead? Do you plan to write more non-fiction? What do you plan to do with the book? Do you want to launch it as a web series?
Yes, I would. My ambition with this book is to adapt it for screen, and that is. I mean, when you read the book, you will also see that it's very visually written. So I'm told that when people read it, they feel like they're watching the film on paper, like that. So, and that was the intention, and that happened, and I'm very glad about it, because it is about, the theme is the film industry. So the more visual it is, the better it is. You know, and the whole idea of show, don't tell in writing. So that is the goal with this book. And I'm right now quite spent with a story idea. I have scribbled a few, and I have left them in cold storage. So I think there will be a time for that also, when I pull something out or I'll be inspired. And it's not to say that I'm waiting for inspiration, but I also want to enjoy this phase of talking about something that I've spent 3 years working on. So I don't want to overlap it with what's next. And this is something that I said, like, you know, I'm the first person to jump into multiple things, so I'm kind of training myself to let myself be in this moment and enjoy it. So I don't know if I will write a fiction or a non-fiction, but I'm currently working on documentary, so maybe from all of that, I might get fiction or non-fiction, who knows.
May you show up for this as well, and maybe happen to see a screenplay of the book in 2020. So coming to your documentary, so to to tell you all as an audience that, you know, she runs a Section 8 company, which is a not-for-profit company, and it's called Indic Quotient Media Foundation, and she's currently working on some documentaries. And so would you like to enlighten us more about the company and how that came into existence while jumping into too many shows? Yeah.
Yes. So it's very proud about. It's called Indic, INDIC, Indic Quotient Media Foundation. And the idea was that, I'm making documentaries on the temples of India. And the idea was that it predates to, not predates actually, it goes back to 2021. I'd been wanting to learn Sanskrit, the language Sanskrit, for a while, and then COVID happened, and then so many things happened, and I in fact had a story idea around that. So, for that I had to learn the language. So that is how it happened. The seed was planted way before in 2018, and I was thinking of ideas, and I wanted to do something around that. And then for that I would have needed to learn the language. So I think I put that out to the universe. And in 2021, when the second wave had also passed and we had all in the family come down with the worst COVID of our lives, the worst COVID phase, the second one was the worst. So I heard from this Gurukul in Banaras called Panini Kanya Mahavidyalaya, and I heard that they're doing this boot camp for people who want to learn Sanskrit. So I jumped at that and I said, I'm going for this. And it was a 40-day boot camp. So I went to Banaras, I stayed in that Gurukul, and I learned Sanskrit. And I understood that when I was in that Gurukul, when you're in a place like that, you don't just learn the language. You imbibe and sort of take in the value system, of how they live, of how they function, and to understand that at one point on our land, we had so many Gurukuls. And that was the education system we had. The British system sort of corrupted our way corrupted our language, our way of thinking, and so on and so forth. And I genuinely feel that language is a very, very strong marker of how we think and what our worldview is. So somehow with that, my desire to put this out, especially for the urban people, for the youngsters who are so Americanized in so many ways, to make them, to see for myself and to help people understand, especially the young people, that this is what our culture is, and it is rich, and it's beautiful, and it's something that we need to learn, and it's going to be a lifelong lesson. Swami Vivekananda said in a speech he gave in the US that if you're born in this land, you already have the Vedanta inside you, whether you recognize it or you don't. You could have no understanding, you could never have read one text, one word from a scripture, but you have it in you. It's part of your DNA. And that is the beauty. And so I thought that at whatever stage one feels that desire, that want to go towards something like this, one must. And so Indic Quotient came from that thought, and the idea was IQ. So the abbreviation is IQ. So basically to uplift the IQ of our own people. It's a shame that, so I was in Japan a few days back, and the beauty about this came up as a discussion. The beauty about Japan is that those people are very close to the way we are in terms of hospitality, in terms of warmth, and they have the best technology, they have the most modern living, but they have a humility, which is very unlike the West. The West is a very decadent society. They have everything, but they are a decadent society. Unlike the Far East, where they value their culture, and a large extent to why they have not corrupted mentally a lot is because they treasure their language and they speak it, and that sort of seeps into tradition. Of course, they have the similar issues that the young people over there are also getting are in awe of the Americans and that lifestyle. But that's something that when you travel, then you understand that we have this. And why don't we know our own language? Why don't we know our own culture? You may not do this, not wear it on your sleeve every day and go out to work, but know it and not snub it. So that, it's like go local to go global. And when you understand your own culture and you take pride in it, then there is nobody has the power outside to sort of come and tell you who you are, to define your identity for you. So I think with IQ, my aim is to sort of put this work out there, and films is something that I'd studied and I've done so via the medium of films, documentaries, and we're also bringing in artificial intelligence via the graphics, and because when you're talking about, say, different yogas, or you're talking about some things where you go back in time, say in temples, I want to talk about, say, the deities or the stories that come from what is the belief of this place. Now I can't go and shoot that, so that all we create via graphics and via AI and everything. So it's very fascinating also that we're bringing in technology to tell stories about from our epics, and to also understand that how they hold the nuggets of wisdom for our future. So that is something which I want to do.
In fact, the other day I was just attending a gig where they were playing music which is inspired by the Indian art form, but they used AI to represent that, and you can do a live sketch and it would be represented on the screen, the entire format. So there's so much happening, and our culture really is so much of history, but we do not know about it, and it's really a shame that we don't. Hats off to you that you're bringing it out and at a much larger level, and we hope you succeed in it in every way. Yes, yes. So something now I can go on about the topics, and I had some 24 questions listed to her, but I think we are running short of time. So I just have 2 more questions before we open the floor for the audience to question. So one quote that really stuck by me on your post was that you mentioned about learning to smile at devils, swallowing the discomfort and keeping it forever sexy. What role does resilience play in your life? Is it something that has been passed down from the women? You said that you were one of the women born after 40 years, but I'm sure the women in your family, what role have they played? Have they passed down this kind of wisdoms to you, or how was it growing up?
I think just to be a woman is to be strong. And let's start with the physical, with the biology, with the anatomy. There is menstruation, which happens every month. There is childbirth. That level of endurance and physical pain that women's bodies are capable of taking on is very hard for men to imagine. And I'm not going into the man and woman thing here. I'm just saying that physically, when one starts with, how do we talk about mental endurance sometimes? When we start off with physical endurance because that's our most tangible understanding of pain and of endurance, right? So just talking basics and not general. That's our most immediate understanding of pain. And so women have experienced that they experience that through their lives. And then there is menopause, which I haven't come to that stage, but I'm sure that must be.
It's a dreadful one. I keep seeing people and
I see some faces smiling and nodding, and I'm like, okay, fine, I'll get there and I'll know. But you understand, and there are more women in this room, so you know that how that builds resilience automatically is something which is not unique to me, which is just because in this life I've been born as a woman. That's number one. Second is, and also, I think I'm just going to again use a reference of this web series, Fleabag. Have you watched Fleabag? Has anybody watched it? Okay, Fleabag is this series written by and enacted, and this lady who's enacted in it also, she's the writer, Phoebe Waller-Bridge. And there is a scene from that series which kind of went viral, that clip, where this older woman is sitting with this lady, Phoebe, at a bar, and she's telling her, men go to war, and they go there so that they can touch each other, so that they can hit each other, so that they can feel each other, and they can, sort of cause like hurt and harm, so they can feel something, so when they bleed, they feel something. She said, men have to go to war to feel that. We women, we have it all going on inside us. We don't need to go out. It's going on inside us. So, it's a universal thing. Just to be born as a woman is to have resilience. And and of course, as life is, as we grow older, we see, we're unfortunately challenged with a lot of societal beliefs which we constantly are fighting and coming out of, and that is individual to individual. And but yes, resilience is something which I don't think is unique to me, but I feel that in the process of writing this book, and I would want to say more about this character Meera, because there are certain elements that I've put in her character, but it'll be a spoiler, so I don't want to. I would want you to read it, and when you read it, perhaps now you'll understand what I'm saying, that sometimes because we are somehow, the system has trained us to not think for ourselves, and to sort of always put somebody else's wishes and desires and demands ahead of us. It's a lot of unlearning. So most of my adult life has just been unlearning, not learning.
Yeah.
In the sense that is the learning in itself, but unlearning a lot of faulty conditioning that has come up, which you've started to think that, this is how life is, this is how my place in this world, this is what my place in the world is, this is how I should identify with myself, this is how I should present myself. And the shoulds have become such a, they have just gone
Shackles,
in the subconscious, that one is operating out of that without realizing, till one sits down and does that work. That's why journaling has helped me a lot. Not consciously seeking to understand, but just understand. And I would even go so far as to say that one is to be born as a woman, and then the other is to understand the masculine and the feminine that both men and women possess. So I think when we understand that, then we understand that we're not different. We just look different outwardly, and we are designed differently. But yeah, this is what I think about your question. Sorry, long answer. Very long, winding answer, but
You're just loving it.
So again, I missed that part where what was it being a woman in your family?
In my family.
What were the women like? What roles did they play? Were they also as dynamic as you were, or they were all to patriarchal setups? Did they get to learn to unlearn?
I think they've unfortunately played to the way. Growing up, I don't know if I should. I think I've been a bit of a black sheep in that sense.
You were a black sheep.
And I've been a tomboy most of my life, and I'm saying this as when I'm talking about being a woman. Growing up, without realizing, I was one of the boys because I was surrounded by boys. And growing up, and I thought, oh wow, that's so cool and that's so nice and everything, and I get my way around it with a lot of things, and to sort of curb certain expressions that I would have, even if they were emotions that I had. Or at times I would see my mother, at the drop of a hat, like I think she was going through a menopause and I was younger and I did not understand. So I used to be like, why do you cry? Why are you crying? I wouldn't understand. I would speak out of ignorance. And now I sometimes I tear up at the drop of a hat. It's something really silly. I would see a kid running, or I would see a puppy, or it would be nothing. I would experience something in my environment, and that does not warrant any sort of emotional reaction, but it will happen. And I understand that, there is a lot of emotional labor that women are always doing without realizing. There's a lot of emotional labor that, you're sometimes looking out for your siblings, your parents. As you get older, you're parenting your parents. And so in my family, I think because of the way the times were, our parents, my parents, the generation they come from is what I'd call the baby boomers, right?
Yes.
So they were too busy building a life for themselves. And before that, my grandparents, so they were essentially, their biggest challenge was that, say with my grandparents, it was like just to get a financial footing, just to sort of So I'm a Sikh, and my parents, my grandparents were in Pakistan, undivided India at the time. And when partition happened, they came to India. And they came straight to Delhi. So I have no relatives or anything in Punjab, as people think, oh, you're Punjabi, so you have relatives in Punjab. So no, they straight away came to Delhi. And at that point, the need of the hour was just get up, work. You know, if you're the woman, then you look after the household chores and you ensure that, you know, the food is cooked, your children are fed, your husband is fed, the clothes are cleaned and sewed and repaired and everything, you know, and you have to work within that means. So in that way, I saw my grandmother and I saw the strength she had, you know, the endurance she had like that. And she played out her part in the way the society sort of expects of women. And she played out her part, and I saw my mom play out her part. And I think I was lucky to have, and like I said, and at the start I said, my mother had stage fright. You know, so there were things she wanted to do and she could not explore in her time. And when she got older, I think she just felt a little, you know, inhibited with exploring. So she wanted to live that through me. So I think I got lucky with that, you know, I had that exposure. But even so, I still had to put myself out there and learn with time that, you know, this is not something that I don't want to be limited. And I think that is where a lot of things are also, a lot of my choices are also coming from. That I don't want to be limited. I may not be able to do everything, but I want to do things that I want to do and not have regret in life. That after, at 50, at 60, at 70, I don't want to look back on life and think that, you know, I had the chance or I had the desire and I didn't give it a shot. Even if I could not pursue it forever, but for a long period of time, but at least give it a shot and see if that's something that you know I find interesting. So I think watching the women in my family, looking at the women in my family, I had that resilience that was a gift from them for sure, and I just wanted to sort of, you know, also sort of take that and put that out on a larger platform.
And I must say that you're not in any way a black sheep. I don't know if that is, if your achievements after all that you've done, and if you still call yourself a black sheep, then probably we need to go under the carpet. So, okay, moving to the last question for the evening before we open the floor. I've seen that you are you have a fascination towards pets and animals, and you have a lot of dogs, I think. I'm not sure how many, that's what I was going to say, but you love dogs. So, could you tell us about your inclination? Because you said that friendship is something that you could not have because your parents were moving around when you settled. So, does it bring that kind of stability in having a pet?
Oh yes. Wow, that's a very nice question. Actually, that part of the question you had. Yes. Growing up, I was an animal lover since the time I was a baby, and since the time I was a puppy. I loved animals, and this one story that my parents tell me is when I was probably just old enough to be able to sit up, and we were in Bombay. My father was posted there, and we used to go to the beach very often. So I was playing with the puppy. And I was drinking fruity out of a straw, and I was trying to feed fruity from the straw to the puppy. And so, I mean, I was just always very fond of animals, and I always wanted a pet in the house. And you know, we were a nuclear family, and you know, there was no help. My mom was looking after everything. She said, you know, you kids are enough for me. I cannot get another one.
I say the same.
So I've always wanted a dog, and. So I used to play, and I literally, if I tell you stories about things I did as a child, I used to be playing in the neighborhood in the DDA park, and there would be houses where, you know, there are gates and the pets are sticking their heads out from between the grill, and I would go and pet them, you know. They would be, I don't know, I was never scared, so I would go like see if they were friendly and just pet them and make friends with families, with old people like grandparents and all, because their pets were there. And so I was like, oh, so cute. And literally in my grandparents' house when we used to go for summer vacations, there used to be a dog we used to play with, a pet somebody used to bring to the park. This one time that person did not bring their pet to the park. And I held my grandfather's hands and said, let's go look for him. And somehow, strangely, itne bade, matlab, how do you find a pet like that? I did. We went into some lanes and there that pet was in the balcony. I said, there it is. And we literally reached their house. So, I was shamelessly a dog lover. And because I never had a dog, so I used to go and play with other people's pets. And my friends had this German Shepherd. And I used to hang out a lot with them only because they had a dog. And I used to love it when, and they look so majestic, those German Shepherds and all. So their father used to throw the frisbee like this and the dog would go running and catch it. And I thought, what a sight, what a beauty. And I went home, I told my father, I said, I want a German Shepherd. And I was in class 2, I think. And he said, we're not getting a dog. So anyway, much later, in 2015, we got our first and we got a German Shepherd. I said, we are going to get a German Shepherd. But that is just the crazy part of it, just the silly part of it. But what I learned from my pet is that, when you are, that's a family member, that's a member. It's a living being and it is teaching you so much without speaking. And it's incredible. I remember and so in our family we're all traveling a lot, always packing. Every 3 days somebody's got their bags packed and moving. So he used to always feel a little sad whenever he would see that somebody's pulled out the suitcase from the cupboard. I would see his body language. When COVID happened, when the lockdown happened, all of us were in the house for months. We were not going. Office bhi nahi jana tha. Ghar pe the. Sab ghar pe the. His appetite went up. He started eating more. And before that, I used to have to feed him with my hands, that kuch kha le. He wouldn't eat. And during the lockdown, he was asking for food 4 times a day. His appetite just went up. He was so happy to see us all. And I thought to myself, wow, they're just simple. Imagine being so excited about your loved ones every day of your entire life. How incredible that is. So it's something that I have learned from him. And what I think that is something that I've seen that he's there. And it also breaks my heart to think that pets don't live that long, dogs don't live that long, So it just makes me very sad. But yes, I think that has also contributed to something, I think, during the lockdown. He was just anytime, but especially then. He was a friend. And there are so many times when I've had meltdowns. And I don't know how animals understand. They just understand. They will just come and sit next to you and they will do nothing. Or he'll probably pick up a toy and he'll bring it to me. And I'm sitting in my balcony and I'm just like tearing up and he will just bring a toy. And I would think that he doesn't know, but he knows. He knows everything. And they just absorb and they take. And sometimes, even the health issues, suppose he has a loose stomach, he's not doing well, he's not keeping well, he has to go to the doctor. It tells me that it's probably some energy he's picked up from all of us. So animals, dogs, cats, whatever, they take the hit for us so many times energetically because they're so much more connected and they have a straight connection. We have a very convoluted way of looking at life and thinking. We become our own worst enemies.
They're like kids, they're as good as having a child.
Oh yes.
In fact, sometimes I tell my child that it's even worse because you can't even put a diaper on. But they're as good as having a child. Like, they really understand. Even with kids, we feel that they don't understand, they're too small. But I think if there is any negativity in the environment, they sense it. I have a 1-year-old and he can sense it.
Yes.
The moment, So great. I'm so glad that you were so honest and open about all your childhood memories, and I'm sure we all know much more about you today as a human, as an author, and also as someone who's playing so many roles. So we'll open the questions for the floor, and since we are running late on time, we would request not many, but probably 2 or 3 questions at max. So any questions in the audience?
So Puneet, what was the difference? I mean, what did you learn from your writing journey? I know I've heard a lot of these pieces that you were talking about, various phases of your life and then into a writer. But what is it that after you wrote that final word, what was that feeling that you had?
Technically, I learned about writing, book writing, novel writing. If I have to just get into very specifics, I learned how to write a story in long form, and how to work characters, how to build the character arcs, how to drip feed information, like I said, how to foreshadow. I want to tell you something in chapter 7, but I will foreshadow it in chapter 2, and you will not even get to know that could become something. But that plays on you. So how it insidiously plays on your mind as a reader, and it draws you in. So those were certain technical skills that I learned along the way, thanks to my mentor, Vinita Zucchi. And that is something which I think I could not have. I mean, one can learn, that is what one does, but that is something which writing this book taught me. And that's only for, the sky's the limit now. Like if I write again, write further, write more fiction maybe. So that's one aspect. And as far as what I've learned about myself as a person is that I'm in a much more relaxed space. This book writing has been a catharsis for me, a cathartic experience for me. So I think that I'm taking myself less seriously. I'm giving myself a little more, I'm cutting myself some slack after writing this book. So which is why I'm wanting to enjoy the process of talking about the book as much as I did when writing about the book. So there is so much. I really feel that there is a pre-COVID and a post-COVID phase to me. And I think a lot of us feel that. And COVID has brought out a lot of, what I call in the book actually, I start the very first sentence, the thing in the book is 2018 BC, which is, BC stands for before COVID. So yes, so there is a before and an after COVID phase to it.
Thank you for all the insights. So I just want to ask you 2 questions. One is that you must have found your own personality flowing into your characters, and maybe that allowed you to live out your life in a different way while writing. And secondly, did you find at any stage that you've created these characters but they've got out of control and they have taken over your life?
Like make a monster bigger than... Well, actually, yes, it's coming from life. So there were elements, interactions I've had with people, some events that sort of lodged themselves in memory, and I did not put it as is, I rehashed it because that's... storytelling is not telling a story, storytelling is retelling a story. So I've retold certain parts of my life through these characters. But that I will not kiss and tell you, because that is not something that, I mean, it'll take away from your experience as a reader, the intrigue that you would feel as a reader. But yes, it is sprinkled with a lot of elements from life. In fact, one thing that somebody had remarked was that the physicality of Meera is very similar to myself, and I did that on purpose, because if I'm going to cast myself as Meera, we have to look alike, So yes, so certain things like that, and certain things also through the other characters, and a lot of things that I've observed, certain things that just in the film industry as a newcomer, as a female, there are certain challenges you face, and there are certain things that you think that, okay, well, just as an example, just for a little masala, I'll tell you one thing, that, so I was in Bombay, and there was a talent agency which had reached out to me, and talent agencies, basically, they will take you on board, and then they will charge a certain commission, and then they'll sort of promote you. And I was talking to somebody, and that person said to me, it was just the hubris, which is the word also I've used in the book, is that, the way he said to me that, you look like, he said something like, you look like a supermodel, and we are having a shoot in South Africa, and I'm sure you want to go to South Africa. Who doesn't want to go to South Africa? I said, wow. Like just that sense of that, you'll dangle a carrot and people will just come chasing and you'll just bite the bait, basically, in anything you offer, and that kind of sense of entitlement and that kind of way of looking at women, and there is a lot of objectification that happens, whether they say it overtly or they don't. I mean, you can tell sometimes with the way people interact with you. There is exploitation. There is also that when you're a newcomer, they know you are a disposable commodity in the sense that if they do not select you, there are 500 more candidates for that role. So and who would be willing to do it? Who would be willing to work for free also? For that role, because visibility, because all of that exposure. So, they really exploit you even monetarily. So those elements which one had seen and experienced. So I put stories like that via said those stories via these characters. And it makes for a good story. Generally also, that when we're sitting in rooms and we're talking about it, we're talking about experiences. And I'm sure every industry has its own challenges like that. So some of that I have put in certain aspects which are a little more in the grey area, have been spoken by characters.
Yes.
And would there be any experiences which maybe didn't work out for you positively and you've changed the outcome in your book? Like the ending, you made it more, something fulfilling for yourself? Because you can do it via fiction.
No, for sure. In fact, the other way around. There's certain things that did work for me, and for the characters, I just didn't make it work for them. Because I wanted to give them some obstacle, Come on.
Give us some sob story.
I mean, I can't give you, not a sob story, but I can't give you a straight, plain and simple, this happened and then it got done. And hey, so what's the story, You have to give them a challenge and you have to give them an obstacle.
Struggle.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, that is
So-
yeah.
Yeah, so this is, I just want to know about those 2 months and what kept you motivated or inspired? Because recently I was just going through A.R. Rahman's interview, so where he said whenever there is a work for him to create music, for days or months, he said, I'm just lost, completely lost. Nothing is coming to my mind. And suddenly one fine day, when I'm literally pushed to the wall and everything starts downloading. So that was his experience. So he said, this happens everywhere, every time with me. And when we think of A.R. Rahman, we just think moment he must be sitting with the music and he must be getting everything. So he said like this, so something like this, did you experience something like this? Like okay, 2 months and finally you're pushed to the wall and everything started downloading and this book is here.
I have a bit of a foggy memory with that, like which day was it that I had that download, but something that I have tried as an experiment is that, and I will again go back to my time in Bombay when I was auditioning. I used to have a cook. He used to make my food for morning and night. And then one day she had to go back to her village and her mother was in bed or something. And I thought to myself that, instead of hiring somebody else, let me start cooking. मैं ही हूँ, तो एक जन का खाना कितना हो सकता है? And I started cooking. I can cook. It's just that I'm a lazy cook. I'm an impatient cook. And I said, okay, no, you know what? Like, let me I'll streamline everything and all of that. So I started every morning. I would make my food for the day and cook, and then I'll go for my auditions. And I realized that time, in that 1 month of cooking every day, and then I continued with that, was that my performance in front of the camera was much better. And it's very scientific. It is just, we have these neural pathways. So when we're constantly doing one thing, it becomes repetitive. And we start working on auto mode. The moment we give ourselves something else to sort of break away from that routine, it kind of helps us think laterally. It helps us think and approach the same problem from a different lens. And I did not realize that. But when I started cooking, I started performing better as an actor. And so at this point of time during COVID, those 2 months I was blank, I was drawing a blank. I was doing other things, that was just giving myself different sort of activities to do so that I could I could just not stress about one aspect, because the more, it's like sand, you know, the tighter you hold it, the more it slips out. So I did not want to keep fussing over that. Of course, at the back of my head, and when you meet the family, at that time my grandparents were alive, so you know, they used to see me every day for lunch, during lunch hours, and they'd be like, "Kitna likha? How many words?" I said, "Don't ask me that question." Every day they would, you know how they're very sweet, but they will ask you every day, "Aaj book khatam ho gayi." You're expecting the answer that "Aaj book khatam ho gayi." You know, so you know, so when breaking out of that rhythm, out of that routine, that at some point, I think it was, it melted the iceberg, so to speak. I don't know, like, it just made me start approaching the challenge that I had. So I got stuck at a point where I had given these characters, these 4 characters, a lot of issues. They were in a deep mess, basically. And I did not know how to bring them out of it. And to even answer your question, like, did I get too sucked into that process? Yes, I did. Like I said, I had to write for each as each character. So that can become very challenging, and how you switch off and switch on. So that became a little difficult. So this process was madness for me, and maybe in the next book I'll write, there will be a method. I know there'll be a method to that madness, but this was pure madness. This book was pure madness. And so, not like giving myself different activities to do, like, you know, sort of, again, cooking, gardening a little bit, doing things other than writing, but also sitting with my laptop on and thinking, "Aaj kuch aa jayega. Today I'll be able to think of something." You know, so that actually helped. I don't recall the day that happened, because it was also very, it was not sudden. It was not that one day I suddenly had ideas. It happened gradually, that, you know, one day I got a certain idea, which was not formed.
She's also a music buff, and you spoke about Shillong music, which is also the rock capital of India. Would you like to share about that?
So with Artery, I was interviewing musicians, and I wanted to record them live. So, you know, have them play for camera live, not recorded, and interview them, independent musicians, and how they make music and all of that. And then it was a conversation with friends, and we said, they were filmmakers. So I said, "Chalo, let's go to Shillong." And we went to Shillong, and those stories are like plenty. I mean, that will take up too much time, and I'll not go into it. But Shillong was basically a musical documentary profiling the landscape of Shillong, the musical landscape of Shillong. And it was per chance that we met some of the biggest names in music without actually even fixing an appointment with them beforehand. I literally cold emailed the Prince of Tripura.
Yeah.
I just wrote to him on email that, you know, this is what we are doing and we would like to interview you, because each one of them has a connect with music. And he responded, and we went to his palace. We saw his palace. We saw this 1902 piano in his living room. It was dated to 1902, and I was just touching it. I was like, "Kuch nikalna." It's a piece of antique. So, I mean, all of those amazing things that happened, which we had the good fortune to document and put on camera, was it's on YouTube. It's something. It's called "Somebody Once Told Me," and the idea behind the title of this is that how we develop our taste in music is usually when somebody tells us about a music. You know, did you listen to this song? Did you listen to that song? And usually that's how we build our
music collectives.
Yes,
Library.
that's how, exactly. So it comes from a lot of social suggestions and references. So, you know, that the title is called "Somebody Once Told Me," and literally that's how it panned out while we were at Shillong. Somebody told us, "Hey, did you meet this rapper?" And that rapper told us, "Hey, did you meet so-and-so?" And "Hey, did you meet so-and-so?" And that literally happened like that as a chain. So, yes.
Great. So, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Do you have any more questions?
Yes.
So you mentioned your hunt for your dance teacher, Bhavani. Were you able to meet her or reconnect?
Yes.
And what was the experience like? After how many years did she remember you? And
Oh, yes. I couldn't meet her because she was in Bangalore, and this was in 2021. So that second wave of COVID was still on. So, but Goa was all cool, you know. nothing was, there was no COVID in Goa apparently. I mean, it was happening. It was, but it had, what I'm saying that
Maybe the news
in a
didn't
lighter
portray
way.
the real Goa.
I know. I'm saying this in a lighter way, but this was a Holi festival on Holi that happened in Goa. So, of course, there were people and there was all of that precautions being taken, but there was a festival happening. I mean, I'm just saying in comparison to Delhi and how we were sitting inside our homes, we were getting out. So, she was in Bangalore when I called her. And I spoke to her on the phone, and of course she remembered me. She's like, you're one mad child, I remember what you said. I used to tell her random things, I used to wear these lehenga cholis, and I used to go to her class before everybody else would reach, and I said, ma'am, when I grow up, I'm going to become Miss World. And she remembered all these stories. I don't know, random stuff I would talk to her, and she remembers all the stories also. So, it was very nice talking to her. And in a very, she gave me her blessings like properly, she said, yes, go. And when I did perform, I was so nervous. It was a full moon night, Holi, so it was a full moon night. My heart was pounding, and I also had a little fall on stage. But it happened, everything. After that, I was light. Up till the performance, I was very, very, yes, I was anxious, and I was, but after the performance and I had a little fall also, I was like, chalo, now it's all done. Now you're fine.
Yeah. Like Aishwarya Rai had a fall, remember, in 1994 when she was competing for Miss India. That happened in Goa, in fact. She had a fall.
Yeah, the competition was there.
Yeah, the competition happened in Goa.
So partly the Miss World thing did come.
Great. So
Thank you all so much for being such a patient audience. I'm sorry, I when I start telling stories, I just get into a...
But we
I kept rambling, so you've been very patient with my
You have
rambling.
learned to tell stories.
Loved it.
For that very, very nice session. I'd now like to invite Gaurapriya Paikani, she's also an SAS woman for Goa, to come and propose a vote of thanks. And once again, thank you to all of you for being here.
Wow, this has been a wonderful conversation till now. And if we had no crunch for time restraint, I think none of us would want this to end. I, Gaurapriya Paikani, SAS Woman of Goa, express a heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed guest honor Puneet Sikka, and sincere appreciation for gracing us with your knowledge, creativity, and letting us little bit into the insight of your life. Thank you for that. And I think a takeaway that all of us would go from here is that burning of the journals, just a decluttering of our minds and throwing away all the crap that we don't want anymore. To our esteemed audience, thank you for being the heartbeat of this evening. It is your language, love, and constant support that keeps us geared at all times. Thank you. I would also like to thank our hospitality and venue courtesy, Siddharth Goa, Shri Cement Group, and media partner Lokmat, and the unwavering support of SAS Women of Goa. Prabha Khaitan Foundation promotes cross-state cultural understanding and appreciation. A mosaic of cultures forms the backbone of our nation, contributing to its vibrancy and richness. This is to support our ongoing efforts to foster unity and appreciation for the rich culture heritage across India's diverse states. Keeping this in mind, we are pleased to present the author with one such giveaway on behalf of the team. We are pleased to fill with a giveaway made in a beautiful dokra. Dokra, a non-ferrous metal, beautifully molded by artisans to craft artifacts, accessories, utensils, and jewelry. It owes its name to the Dokra Damar tribe of West Bengal. I would like to call, can Mrs. Anju Dindo please, Managing Director of Femento Groups, hand over.
Alumni of LSR from where she is.
Yeah, yeah, from the same alumni. Can I request Puneet please to...
Thank you for having me.
Very nice. It was really nice.
no, let them.
Thank you one and all. And do take a complimentary copy autographed by Puneet Sikka personally before you leave. Thank you and good night.